So thank you so much, Dr. Álvaro, again for joining us. So for today's conversation, it's more a general conversation about, trends in CAR-T, your experience, and really how you see, the landscape evolving and CAR-T as a treatment evolving within the treatment paradigm and prescribing practice. So I guess maybe just to kick off, given the ongoing efforts to move CAR-Ts up treatment paradigms and into earlier lines of treatment, can we expect CAR-Ts to become more integrated into the treatment regimens? And particularly from a hospital perspective and from an economic perspective, how would this impact the treatment and the pricing and payment for these CAR-Ts?
Thank you very much for that very important question, because we are treating now patients in a very advanced disease, so very fragile patients, and also patients with diseases that are very difficult to cure, precisely because they are in a very advanced phase. So the problem now with the CARs is that the patient itself is very fragile, because she has received a lot of lines of chemotherapy, and also the disease itself, because it's very heterogeneous in the clonality, because it's very advanced. So in terms of efficacy and toxicity, it seems very clear that these CARs should be put earlier in the armamentarium, in the treatment armamentarium of the patient, because the equilibrium between efficacy and toxicity, it favors for sure to administer before we are administering now. So I'm thinking about, for instance, bone marrow transplant, either autologous or allogeneic bone marrow transplant. We are transplanting patients much earlier than a CAR, and a CAR is much less toxic than a bone marrow transplant. So for sure that we will treat patients before, maybe not first line of treatment, because first line of treatment the patient has a burden disease, and we have seen that with the CARs, when the patient has a high tumoral mass, the CARs develop cytokine release syndrome. So the strategy maybe is first to eliminate the disease with, let's say, standard chemotherapy, standard treatment, and as a consolidation is to administer the CAR, but very early in the disease. I would like to make a comment about the cost of the CAR. It is very high, but if you take into consideration that it's just one shot, and there is a high probability of eliminate the disease, even to cure the disease of the patient, is not so costly, it's not so pricey. The cost of a CAR is around 200,000 euros, 300,000 euros, depending on the country, depending on the agreement of the country with the pharma. So, and we are now treating patients that 1 year of treatment many times is 60,000, 100,000 euros per year, and sometimes with a treatment that is maintained for years. So I think it's not so high the cost of the CAR in relation with the benefit of the CAR. The second point is if it is or not, whether it's affordable or not. Now the efficacy of the CAR is limited to certain diseases. So the number of patients is quite limited as well. So I think that now it is not impacting in the budget of a health system in a particular country. But now that it is limited to B-cell neoplasm, basically is ALL, non-Hodgkin lymphoma, multiple myeloma, I think that the number of patients is quite reduced. So I think it's not a problem, a difficulty for a health system.
Where do you see the greatest value proposition for CAR T-cell therapies, whether that's in a particular therapeutic area or in a particular patient population?
I think that there are many niches that have been not explored with CAR. So subtypes of diseases in which the number of patients is reduced, so probably is not worthy for a pharma company to do. But so I think that the main niche to be accomplished is the solid tumors. I'm very surprised that in solid tumors it hasn't been obtained the results that were expected 5-6 years ago. So I think this is the most important area in which I think the pharma companies and the physicians treating solid tumors, I think that are waiting. So it's many patients with no standard treatment. So as compared to malignant hemopathies, in which 50% of the patients in many diseases are cured with current treatment.
What is the unique value of CAR T cell therapies, and particularly in comparison to some of the new technologies that are coming out, such as bispecifics and BiTEs? Is there anything in particular that CAR T cell therapies offer that is quite unique?
Yeah, results with BiTEs are very impressive. So they are very effective in many diseases. So we are also in the clinical trials in multiple myeloma, for instance, we are obtaining extraordinarily good results with BiTEs. But at the same time, it has a limitation, is normal T cell. So we are binding, we are joining the tumoral cell with a T cell, which is good, but this T cell is not a CAR. So this T cell is a normal T cell. It has no co-stimulatory molecule. So the capacity in terms of cytotoxicity, in terms of proliferation, is much higher with a CAR than with a BiTE.
What are your views on the ongoing conversation regarding outpatient administration of CAR T cell therapy? And do you believe that given the current safety profiles of some of the drugs that we're seeing in the commercial setting as well as in clinical trials, outpatient therapy is realistic for patients today?
So the impact of having this possibility of administering outpatient could be different in different countries. In Spain, I think that there is no much difference for a physician, because what we do, for instance, in autologous transplant or in allogenic transplant and with CAR, is just 2-3 days in the ward just to receive the CARs or to receive the bone marrow in the bone marrow transplant, and 3 days later we follow the patient in an outpatient basis. So to save 2-3 days in the ward, I think that is not something very important.
From a physician perspective, what are the greatest challenges or pain points that you encounter while administering CAR T cell therapies?
I think that now, currently, I think is that the status of the patients, the status of the patients, in the sense that the procedure itself is relatively easy. And the toxicity of the CAR, I think that we are accustomed to autologous allogeneic bone marrow transplant, so the toxicity is something quite manageable. The current problem is that the patients are referred from hundreds of kilometers from out of the hospital. So this is first. Second is that they have a very advanced disease. So the patient is with a bad situation many times. Third is that the disease is very active and sometimes in progression. So what is impacting us in the whole procedure currently are the clinical status of the patients receiving a CAR. So because we are always in a hurry, or because the patient is in progressive disease, so we must stop the apheresis. So is the clinical situation of the patient is the most important now factor for anxiety or for worries on the team. And it's because CARs are administered now in the very advanced disease. If in the near future, when it's advanced the treatment to earlier phases, for sure that the patient will be fit.
What has been the impact of COVID this year on treatment using CAR T cell therapies? And do you foresee any long-term impact on how you administer these treatments?
We have had difficulties with COVID in the sense that patients that were already in the list for receiving the CAR, and when the patient has already the slot to perform the leukapheresis, COVID positive. So 1 month waiting for receiving the car, and without possibility of administering a bridge therapy. So COVID has impacted in some patients for that reason, for being positive. Another impact has been that the referral of these patients has decreased because they come from different parts of Spain, and sometimes the patient is in very advanced disease. So if we have this type of restrictions in traveling, sometimes the physician says, okay, the patient is in very bad situation. Now it's very difficult to send the patient to Barcelona. The number of patients has reduced during the COVID. If what has happened with the COVID situation will impact or not in the future, it will depend on the vaccines, of the efficacy of the vaccines and the proportion of the population that will receive the vaccine. So if, let's say, 80%, 90% of the population agrees to receive the vaccine, and the vaccine is 90% of efficacy, I think that there will be no impact. But if only 60% of the population agrees to receive the vaccine, and the vaccine maybe first year is 90%, but in the next years maybe 60%, we will have a certain proportion of the population with the disease. So I think that it will decrease the number of patients receiving the CAR.
Given this exponential interest in CAR T-cell therapies today, how do you think the industry and the space will evolve in the next 3 to 5 years? And in particular, is there a specific disruptor that you think can really change the face of the industry, such as allogeneics or point-of-care manufacturing?
It will depend also of the region of the world. For instance, North America, I think that in the United States, it will keep with just buying the car to a pharma company. That Europe may try point of care in different countries because we are accustomed to do ourselves the things, and also in the bone marrow transplant, we are accustomed to manipulate the product. So with respect to the car, I think is consolidated. So it is amazing, the efficacy and the low toxic profile in comparison to allogenic transplant, because allogenic transplant are chronic lesions or chronic injuries. And I'm totally convinced that the group of researchers will find the way of developing CARs active against myeloid malignancies and also with solid tumors. So I think that in 5 years, we will have CARs with a much wider indications than we have now. So maybe in solid tumors, the solution will be different. So immunotherapy, but different to the CAR therapy in solid tumors, maybe.
From a scientific perspective, which studies or which technologies are you most interested in seeing further results for? Or what do you find most exciting about the CAR T landscape?
There are many clinical trials with humanizing the monoclonal antibody fragment with 2-3 co-stimulatory molecules, with dual targeting 2 antigens. So I think, and also changing the product in the expansion procedure. So I think these are, and also the tracks, with the different cytokines. So I think this combination, we are increasing the persistence. So altogether, I wouldn't say one particular modification to see with a special emphasis. I would say CAR natural killer, so using natural killer cells instead of T cells is very, very interesting. So if results from Rasvani, from the MD Anderson, so if these results are reproduced, will be very interesting, but we will see. So I think that is this compendium of changes, more of that from the clinical trials, more than one particular modification.
Perfect. I think that's all of my questions. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Álvaro. It's been a really insightful and interesting conversation as always.